You won't believe what happened when our power-hungry HOA president decided to bulldoze my disabled sister's wheelchair ramp while she was away at work. But what this entitled neighbor didn't realize was that my sister wasn't just any resident. She was the state governor. This was about to become the biggest mistake of Karen's HOA career. But how did the entire neighborhood end up involved in a national scandal? Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. The bright yellow piece of paper stuck to our front door made my blood boil. It was the 5th HOA violation notice this month, all about my sister Emily's wheelchair ramp. I crumpled it up and tossed it into my growing collection of Karen Mitchells. Official warnings, just as I heard Emily's electric wheelchair whirring up the ramp behind me. Another love letter from our wonderful neighbor? Emily asked with a tired smile. The dark circles under her eyes showed how exhausted she was from her new job, but she never complained. Not about work, not about the car accident that put her in the wheelchair 6 months ago, and definitely not about Karen's constant harassment. You'd think being HOA president would keep her busy enough without stalking our house, I said, watching through our kitchen window as Karen stood in her driveway, aggressively taking pictures of our ramp like a deranged real estate agent. Her perfectly highlighted hair and designer workout outfit couldn't hide the sheer spite radiating off her. I still remember the day we installed the ramp. We followed every rule in the book, hired a licensed contractor, got the proper permits from the city, and even used the exact shade of gray paint that matched our house trim. But Karen showed up before the concrete was even dry, clutching the HOA rule book like it was the holy grail of suburbia. Section 8, Paragraph 3 clearly states that all external modifications must be approved by the board, she had said, her voice dripping with fake concern. We have to maintain our property values, you understand. Sure, Karen, because a wheelchair ramp was definitely going to tank the housing market. What really got under my skin was how Karen kept accidentally scheduling the HOA meetings about our ramp at times when Emily couldn't attend. Not that Emily could have gone anyway. She was too busy running the entire state. Yeah, that's right. My sister isn't just any homeowner. She's the governor. But we'd kept that quiet in the neighborhood, wanting to maintain some privacy during her recovery. And Karen? She had no idea who she was messing with. Unfortunately for her, she was about to find out. The hard way. Last week, I caught Karen Mitchell measuring our wheelchair ramp with a tape measure at 6 a.m. Like a dedicated suburban raccoon, she was out there in her designer yoga pants, creeping around my porch with laser focus. When I confronted her, she had the audacity to say she was just doing her duty as HOA president. Oh yes, Karen. The sacred duty of harassing disabled residents before sunrise. That's when I started documenting everything, videos, copies of her ridiculous notices, and a detailed log of every passive-aggressive encounter. Something in my gut told me we'd need it. But this morning was different. As I helped Emily into her car for her physical therapy appointment, I noticed Karen lurking with 2 men in suits near her house. They were pointing at our ramp and having what I can only describe as the most dramatic discussion ever had about concrete. One was scribbling furiously in a notebook. The other was snapping pictures like he was on a safari. I don't like this, I muttered to Emily. Maybe it's time we let them know who they're really dealing with. Emily just shook her head. I won't use my position to get special treatment. We'll handle this the right way through proper channels. She's a better person than me. But then I saw it, Karen's triumphant smirk as she handed thick manila envelopes to the men in suits. That's when my gut really started screaming. I pulled out my phone and hit star record just in time to hear Karen's voice floating across the morning breeze. Yes, we'll need that bulldozer here first thing tomorrow morning. The board has already approved the removal. My heart stopped. They wouldn't really tear down a wheelchair ramp, would they? As Emily's car disappeared around the corner, I bolted inside, checking our security cameras and grabbing our file of Ham's permits. But what I found in our documents, that changed everything. The next morning, I was enjoying my cereal in relative peace when I heard it. Rumble. A deep, earth-shaking, oh no, someone's making a terrible decision kind of rumble. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. Peering out the window, my worst nightmare was coming to life. Karen. Standing in our front yard in her signature red blazer, clutching a stack of papers like they contained the secrets of the universe. Beside her stood a man in a construction hat, nodding along as Karen pointed directly at our wheelchair ramp. In our driveway sat a massive yellow bulldozer, its metal blade gleaming menacingly in the morning sun. Two workers in orange vests were already measuring the ramp with bright yellow tape measures like it was the final obstacle on a twisted game show, and that's when I knew. Karen had seriously messed up. I stepped out onto my porch just in time to see Karen Mitchell, in all her HOA presidential glory, marching across my lawn like a reality TV villain making a grand entrance. Her designer heels were sinking into the grass, but she pretended not to notice. "Oh, wonderful. You're home," she chirped, flashing the kind of smile that said, "I'm about to ruin your day, and I'm going to enjoy it." I eyed the paper she was waving like a medieval decree. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked, my voice just a smidge shakier than I intended. "Emergency HOA order," she declared, shaking the paper at me but yanking it away before I could grab it. "This structure violates community guidelines, Section 4.23. I took a deep breath, channeling my inner Emily mode, as my sister, the governor, liked to call it. "Karen, we filed all the paperwork. The city approved it." Karen's smile didn't even flicker. "The city isn't the HOA, dear," she cooed, the condescension dripping off her words like an overwatered houseplant. "And as president, it's my duty to uphold our community standards. This ramp," she gestured dramatically, as if pointing out a crime scene, "is an eyesore that's destroying property values." A bulldozer rumbled to life behind her, and my stomach did an Olympic-level dive. I yanked out my phone and pulled up the permits Emily had practically forced me to save. "This is illegal. You can't just demolish private property without proper notice or a court order." Karen let out a high-pitched, overly rehearsed laugh. "Oh, but we did give notice. 3 weeks ago, via certified mail." She flourished another paper, showcasing a signature that looked about as familiar as a foreign tax form. I started dialing my sister, straight to voicemail. Great. I tried her assistant, her security team, even that weird intern who once brought us lattes, nothing. Meanwhile, the construction crew was looking extremely uncomfortable. One of them kept checking his clipboard like it would suddenly start giving legal advice. "If you do this," I warned, my voice steady now, "you're going to be hearing from our lawyers. This violates the Americans with Disabilities Act." Karen's smile twitched, just a little. "The HOA is exempt from—" "No HOA is exempt from federal law!" I practically bellowed, loud enough that lights flicked on in nearby houses. Across the street, Mr. Martinez peeked out, saw Karen, and noped back inside. But Karen was already turning to the bulldozer guy, giving him the kind of nod you see in action movies right before things explode. The blade started lowering toward the ramp we had spent weeks getting installed. I lifted my phone, recording everything. "Last chance, Karen," I said, my voice calm despite the fury boiling underneath. "You're making a huge mistake." Her eyes flicked to my phone, and for the first time, her mask of smug confidence cracked. Just a little. But then she straightened her blazer, squared her shoulders, and sneered. The only mistake was letting this monstrosity be built in the first place. Rules exist for a reason. The bulldozer roared louder. And then, from the sidewalk, Mrs. Walker's voice cut through the chaos. "Oh, honey," she called sweetly, holding up her phone. "You might want to check who you're making an enemy of today." Because, of course, she had been live streaming everything. And in the comments, thousands of people, including, just Governor Emily herself. The bulldozer blade hit the edge of the ramp with a horrific screech, like a robot screaming in agony. I was still recording as our hard-earned, carefully built ramp crumbled into chunks of concrete and broken dreams. What Karen didn't notice was that Mr. Martinez had returned, his own phone raised like a seasoned war journalist. More neighbors gathered, phones up, faces set in the universal expression of, "Ooh, you're in trouble now." Just then my phone buzzed, a text from Emily's head of security. "Stay calm, keep recording, help is 3 minutes out." For the first time all morning, I grinned. Karen was too busy playing Tyrant of the Cul-de-sac to notice the black SUVs quietly turning onto our street. The sirens in the distance grew louder. Sometimes the biggest mistakes come from the smallest missing details, like not knowing your seemingly ordinary neighbor is actually one of the most powerful people in the state. And Karen was about to learn that the very hard way. I will never forget the moment our sleepy suburban street turned into what looked like an action movie. Karen was mid-high five with one of her cronies over their victory when the first black SUV rounded the corner. Then another, and then, oh yes, state police cruisers, sirens blaring, red and blue lights flashing, like we'd just won the Super Bowl of HOA repercussions. My hands shook as I pressed record. This was gonna be good. Karen's smug grin melted into sheer confusion as she took in the fleet of government-issued doom approaching her. "What is this?" she shrieked, voice going up an octave. "This is a private neighborhood matter." That's when the lead security agent stepped out, scanned the scene like a badass secret agent, and opened the door of the center SUV. Silence fell, and out rolled Emily, in her official governor's blazer, wearing the stern expression she reserved for major press conferences and people who made catastrophic life choices. She moved forward, her security team closing in around her like she was about to announce a military operation. And honestly, in a way, she was. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell," Emily's voice rang out, perfectly steady, "this became a state matter the moment you violated federal disability protection laws." She stopped just short of Karen, giving her a look that I'd seen make actual senators break into a nervous sweat. "Not to mention," she continued coolly, "you just destroyed state properties without authorization." Karen's expression cycled through 5 different emotions in 3 seconds before landing on utter panic. "State property?" she croaked. "Yes," Emily said, pulling out her phone. "Would you like to see the ADDU, or should we discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act?" "First, I'm particularly familiar with Title II, having just signed new state protections last month." The crowd was silent. Except, of course, for Mrs. Walker across the street, who was already live streaming the event to what I imagined was an international audience by now. But the HOA bylaws clearly state, Karen stammered, clutching her stack of violation notices like they were holy relics. "Funny you should mention that," Emily said, motioning to her assistant, who stepped forward with a massive binder. "My legal team has been reviewing your HOA's bylaws all afternoon," she continued. Her smile was razor sharp. "Would you like to know what we found?" As Karen's minions began subtly backing away like rats leaving a sinking ship, I had to admire their survival instincts. multiple violations of state housing laws, discriminatory practices, and Emily paused dramatically, flipping through her notes like a prosecutor on a crime drama. Irregular financial records going back 3 years. The crowd gasped. I zoomed in on Karen's face. It had gone whiter than the violation notices she loved handing out. I didn't know, she sputtered. That I was the governor? Emily finished for her. Or that bulldozing a disabled person's access ramp without proper notice or permits is a federal offense. Cue dramatic entrance of 2 state investigators, stepping forward with notebooks in hand. Behind them, I spotted news vans piling in at the end of the street like sharks circling fresh meat. Mrs. Mitchell, one investigator said, flipping open his notepad, we'll need you to come with us to answer some questions about today's events and these financial discrepancies. Karen was still babbling something about property values and HOA bylaws as they led her away. Emily, ever the leader, turned to face the stunned crowd. My fellow neighbors, she began, looking completely unfazed despite being surrounded by the literal ruins of our ramp. Today, we have an opportunity to talk about what community really means. She gestured to the destroyed concrete. This isn't just about me or my access to my home, it's about every person's right to live with dignity. I scanned the crowd. Some faces showed shame, others anger, but most importantly, there was the understanding. Still, as I watched Karen getting escorted to a police car, clutching her HOA rulebook like it was the Constitution, I couldn't help but wonder how many other HOAs were pulling the same shady stunts Karen had been getting away with for years. The morning after the bulldozer incident, as Twitter had now dubbed it, my phone would not stop buzzing. Apparently, we were famous. Our security camera footage had gone viral overnight. News vans were lined up outside our house, and the best part, my old high school friend, now a civil rights lawyer, called me with some very interesting news about Karen. Turns out, this wasn't her first HOA rodeo. Karen had been sued 3 times before for the exact same nonsense in different neighborhoods, and every time she had settled quietly before moving on to terrorize another HOA. This time, however, she had picked the wrong house on the wrong day. Emily, being the powerhouse governor that she is, didn't just get mad, she got way organized. By noon, she was holding a press conference on our front lawn, with the remains of the bulldozed ramp dramatically scattered behind her like the scene of a crime. The reporters went feral when she pulled out a stack of documents, proving that Karen had violated not just federal disability laws, but also 17 different state housing regulations. But the real show was just beginning. One by one, our elderly neighbors came forward. Mrs. Lee revealed how Karen had forced her to remove her medical garden because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. Mr. Martinez showed documentation of how Karen had fined him for installing a wheelchair lift for his veteran father. Even the usually quiet Johnson family spoke up. Karen had threatened to fine them for installing a sensory-friendly playground for their autistic son. By the time they finished, our sleepy suburban street felt very different. Neighbors who had never spoken before were suddenly sharing stories and standing together. Karen, naturally, panicked. She called an emergency HOA meeting to address these unfounded accusations. Nobody showed up, except, of course, for her 2 remaining loyal followers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Meanwhile, Emily had yet invited disability rights advocates onto our house, and half the neighborhood showed up to learn about accessible housing laws. Then, just when we thought things couldn't get juicier, Someone leaked Karen's HOA financial records. And, oh boy, turns out she had been pocketing the fines and using them to pay for her own home renovations, claiming they were board-approved to community improvement. So, the HOA's lawyer resigned on the spot. 3 board members quit via furious emails, which somehow ended up on the local news. Karen, however, refused to go down quietly. She marched up to our house the next morning with a cease and desist letter, demanding we stop spreading lies about her. She did not expect to walk right into a meeting between Emily and the Food State Housing Commissioner, who was very interested in reviewing every single HOA decision Karen had made in the last 5 years. The tears looks on her face when she realized her entire reign of terror was falling apart, priceless. But the best part. Then, watching our neighbors quietly put up and report accessible housing violations signs in their yards, one by one. Until Karen's house stood alone, the only one without a sign. The news helicopters, circling overhead, had caught it all. By sunset, our story had hit national headlines. And just when we thought that was the end of it, Emily got one last tip. It seemed the bulldozing company Karen had hired had ties to her private contracting business, meaning Karen hadn't just broken state and federal laws. She had personally profited from the destruction of my ramp. And that, my friends, was how the mighty HOA queen finally fell. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop with hundreds of messages from neighbors sharing their own HOA horror stories. Reporters were flooding my inbox, eager to cover what had happened. But the real highlight? An email from Mrs. Martinez, the sweet elderly neighbor Karen had fined last month for owning a garden gnome. Turns out she had a whole collection of proof that Karen had been breaking the law, too. Fueled by caffeine and pure pettiness, I printed out every HOA rule and spent the entire day highlighting every single one Karen had blatantly ignored. Meanwhile, Emily's legal team uncovered a bombshell. Karen had never even filed the proper paperwork to become HOA president. She had simply taken over when the previous president moved away, and no one had dared to question her. The more we dug, the more dirt we found. Then, something incredible happened. Our story reached Tommy Chin, a famous YouTube lawyer known for exposing unfair housing rules. He immediately flew in to meet with Emily and offered to help us sue Karen and the HOA for free. His video about our case went viral, hitting millions of views in just one day. Karen panicked and called for an emergency HOA meeting to defend herself. But this time, it wasn't just an empty room with 2 sleepy retirees. The community center was packed. One by one, neighbors stood up and shared their horror stories. Mr. Walker showed photos of his daughter's treehouse, which Karen had forced him to tear down because it ruined the neighborhood aesthetic. The Wilson family recalled the time Karen fined them for having Christmas lights that were too bright. Then, Emily rolled up to the microphone, but she didn't just talk about the ramp. She announced something even bigger, a new law to protect homeowners from HOA abuse. The room erupted in cheers when she revealed its name, the Right to Home Happiness Act. And then came the knockout punch. Our security camera footage revealed that Karen had lied on official documents, falsely claiming she had permission to bulldoze the ramp. That's when her own lawyer quit on the spot. 2 days later, we stood by our window, sipping coffee, watching Karen pack up her beloved rose bushes, the ones she forced everyone else to plant, and drive away. The new HOA board? Absolute legends. They immediately turned the old violations office into a community help center. Instead of sending out fines, they now send welcome baskets to new neighbors. They even launched a program to help elderly residents with home repairs. Emily's ramp was rebuilt, but this time it was even better. Local artists painted it with beautiful flowers, and soft LED lights made it glow at night. The neighborhood kids actually think it's the prettiest thing on the block. Last week, Emily hosted a massive barbecue in our backyard. Seeing everyone laughing and eating together, right where Karen once stood screaming about grass height regulations, made me realize something important. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. Oh, and remember the demolition company that helped Karen destroy the ramp? After everything went viral, they started offering free ramp installations for disabled residents across the state. Their CEO personally apologized to Emily Bao and even started a scholarship fund for students studying disability rights law. But the biggest surprise? Yesterday, I got promoted to lead the state's new homeowner protection office. My first mission: teaching other communities how to turn their HOAs from bullies into actual helpers. Emily says this is just the beginning. And you know what? Looking at how much has changed in just 1 year, I believe her. Our story even made it into school textbooks as an example of standing up against unfair rules. But the real victory isn't in the headlines or the new laws. It's in the little things, like watching Mrs. Martinez add more garden gnomes onto her yard each week, or seeing kids run around freely without fear of Karen showing up with a clipboard. Oh, and Karen's old house? It just sold last week. The new family has 3 kids, 2 dogs, and guess what's in their front yard? A wheelchair ramp for their grandmother. No one complained. Instead, 5 neighbors showed up to help them unpack. And that's when I knew we didn't just change an HOA, we changed minds.